Okay, so today we're going to be looking at the Indus Valley, and we're going to be looking at trying to find the main events of the Indus people and to put it onto a timeline to show what happened to the Indus Valley, what the events were, and obviously what happened and why they're not still there today. So about 3300 BC, so before Christ, when it became obviously AD, the farmers came to the Indus Valley. So people came and they started to settle. They brought their cows and their sheep, and they started to build the cities, and the cities grew and grew and grew. And obviously, these two cities here were some of the bigger cities, which grew to become what they were today. So it also has shown that clay pots were made. So during this time, they did the farming, they had the clay pots, the cities were growing, and more people came and settled. Then 100 years later, they began to use an early form of Indus Signs or script. So this is when we started to see the symbols and what we would now say is writing, but obviously at this time they used like signs and symbols to obviously show what they were trying to say. However, we still haven't been able to decipher it. We haven't been able to understand what this means because obviously it was so long ago now, and we still are trying to figure it out, but we haven't as yet. Okay, so then a few hundred years later, so 2650 BC, these larger cities started to flourish. They started to really develop. Mud walls were being built into brick houses, as well as including things like bathrooms. A drainage system was started to be built underneath the town underneath the city as well. So this is really when everything started to come together in the city. Around this time, 2600 BC, we found that clay models show that oxen and buffalo would be pulling the ploughs to harvest the fields. Obviously today we have things like combine harvesters. Obviously in those days they used animals to pull the ploughs to churn up the soil and to collect the crops. And obviously as time went on, more and more clay pots were also produced. So about 2500 years BC, that's when obviously we started with the different signs and symbols, but this is when they turned into the seals. And this is, remember when we looked at it, this is what the traders used, which showed who owned what, who was selling what, and they used to use the seals to showcase that information as well. Okay, so they were made of soft clay, and these were used by the traders to mark whose goods they were, whose services they were, whose vegetables and pottery that might be that they sold on the market. Okay, so about 100 years later, this is when we would say that the Indus Valley was at its peak. It was when they had the highest population of over 5 million people that used to live in the valley. It's when everything had come together and it was running so smoothly. Okay, so then about 1800 BC, this is where the Indus Valley started to decline. So after 800 years of it running smoothly, after the cities building up, they started to become dirty, the trade started to stop, and the buildings started to crumble. And this could have been the fact that obviously they lived on the side of the river, and the river started to dry up, so they lost the nutrients coming from the water that was obviously which they used on the soil to help with their farming. They lost that as a source of obviously to drink as well. So this all led to the decline of the Indus Valley. And finally, this resulted in the Indus civilization coming to an end, where the people that used to live in the Indus Valley started to move on to other areas so that they could continue with their trade and their farming elsewhere. Okay, so your task for today then is you're going to now produce a timeline. So we've done these before, and here's an example of something you might wish to do. So first thing I would like you to do is to draw the large arrow all the way across your page. Now what I would probably suggest doing is using either a piece of paper or in your workbook, and instead of doing it portrait, I would do it landscape so that you can do your arrow nice and big across the middle. Then what I would like you to do, in chronological order, in the order starting from the earliest to the latest event, I would like you to first of all write the date. So for example, 3300 BC. And then I would like you to tell me about that event. So obviously we could say about farmers coming and settling in the Indus Valley, starting to make up the cities, but this is where they brought the cows and their sheep and started to settle in the Indus Valley. Okay, you don't need to copy mine, you can just put it into a shorter, more concise version, as long as it is clear as to exactly what event it would be. So you could just say something like, farmers arrived at the Indus Valley with their cows and sheep and started to settle. That could be all you could do. And then I'd like you to draw a picture. So here you could draw a picture of some cows and sheep. Then as you move on to it, you could use lots of different colours as well and your arrows to make sure that we can see the order of the events. You could then obviously write 3200 BC and again briefly write something to summarise what this event was. So you could put something like, the Indus people began to use signs and script, however we don't know what this means today. Okay, so it could be something nice and simple, and you could then draw a little maybe a little square full of little symbols. So what I would suggest doing as well is go back onto this presentation or look on Seesaw, because I have put this onto Seesaw as well, to have a look at some clues of what pictures you could draw. I would like these pictures to be beautifully drawn and coloured, and then once you have completed all of the timeline, all of these 2, 4, 6, 7 events, to then upload your work onto Seesaw so I can have a look at it. Please make sure it is beautifully presented, using a ruler please for your arrows. I don't want to see wiggly lines, and beautifully presented and coloured, and I look forward to seeing your work on Seesaw.